Most people do not drown because of debt. They drown because they borrowed without a future. Somewhere along the way, you were taught to fear loans. You were told that debt is dangerous, that borrowing is irresponsible, that owing money is a sign of failure. And for most people, that fear is justified because most people do not borrow to build. They borrow to survive. They borrow to look successful. They borrow to escape discomfort today, even if it costs them 10 years of freedom tomorrow. But here is the truth few ever tell you. Debt itself is not the enemy. Lack of clarity is. The same tool that traps one person for life becomes the ladder another person climbs to financial independence. The difference is not intelligence. It is not income. It is not luck. It is how they think. The wealthy do not ask, "Can I afford this loan?" they ask. "Who will pay it back?" They do not borrow to consume. They borrow to control. They do not sign loan agreements with hope. They sign them with certainty. This audiobook is not about encouraging reckless borrowing, and it is not about glorifying debt. It is about understanding the invisible line where a loan stops being a burden and starts becoming leverage. You will learn why some people feel anxious the moment they owe a few $1,000s, while others sleep peacefully with millions in debt. You will understand why banks love consumer borrowers and quietly respect asset builders. You will see why most people remain trapped not because they borrowed too much, but because they borrowed like consumers instead of owners. This is not a lesson in interest rates. It is a lesson in power. Because every loan you take is not just a financial decision. It is a decision about who controls your time, your energy, and your future. As you listen, do not rush. Do not judge. Do not resist. Simply observe how you think about money, how you think about obligation, how you think about risk. By the end of this journey, you will no longer ask whether loans are good or bad. You will know something far more important. You will know when debt works for you and when it works against you. And once you understand that difference, you will never borrow the same way again. Debt feels dangerous for a reason. That feeling in your chest when you think about owing money is not irrational. It is not weakness. It is instinct. For most of human history, debt meant loss of freedom. It meant obligation without certainty. It meant working not by choice, but by necessity. And your nervous system still remembers that. When you owe money, your future is partially spoken for. Your time no longer belongs entirely to you. Your choices become narrower. Your margin for error shrinks. This is why debt creates anxiety even before the first payment is due. It is not just a number on a statement. It is psychological pressure. Most people are taught to ignore this pressure. They are told that debt is normal, that everyone has it, that this is just how life works. But deep down, they feel something is wrong, and they are right. Debt becomes dangerous the moment it removes your ability to choose calmly, the moment it forces you to act out of fear instead of intention, the moment it turns money into something you react to, rather than something you direct. This is why so many people feel trapped. They did not just borrow money. They borrowed obligation. They borrowed pressure. They borrowed urgency. And the world exploits this. Consumer debt is engineered to feel harmless at first. Small payments, easy approvals, friendly language, deferred consequences. But the danger of debt is never immediate. It is delayed. The real cost of borrowing is not the interest rate. It is the loss of flexibility. When you owe money for things that do not produce value, your future income becomes pre-allocated. Before you earn it, it is already spent. Before you choose, the choice is made for you. This is why debt feels heavy, because it is a claim on your future. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. They assume that all debt is dangerous, so they either avoid it entirely or they surrender to it blindly. Both paths lead to limitation. Avoiding debt completely often keeps people small. Blindly accepting it keeps them trapped. The truth is more precise. Debt is dangerous when it is disconnected from control. If a loan demands your labor every month just to exist, it owns you. If a loan requires you to keep a job you hate, it controls you. If a loan punishes you the moment your income fluctuates, it dominates you. This is why consumer debt drains people emotionally, not because of the balance, but because of the dependency it creates. You are no longer operating from stability. You are operating from obligation. That constant low-level pressure affects how you think. You become reactive. You avoid risk. You cling to certainty, even when it limits growth. This is how debt quietly shrinks people. But here is the shift most never make. Debt is not dangerous because it exists. Debt is dangerous because of who is responsible for paying it. If you must personally work harder each month just to keep the loan alive, the debt owns you. If the loan is fed directly by your time, your energy, and your stress, it is a leash. This is why the wealthy think about debt differently. They do not ask how much they owe. They ask who pays. They understand something most people never learn. The danger of debt is not the amount. It is the dependency. A loan becomes safe only when it is structurally separated from your survival, when its existence does not threaten your peace, when it does not dictate your daily emotional state. This is why two people can hold the same amount of debt and experience it completely differently. One lies awake at night, anxious, calculating payments, fearing job loss. The other sleeps calmly, focused, undisturbed. The difference is not bravery, it is structure. The first person borrowed without insulation, the second borrowed with buffers, systems, and margins. One borrowed as a consumer, the other borrowed as an owner. Consumers borrow to feel better now. Owners borrow to be stronger later. Consumers borrow to escape discomfort. Owners borrow to expand capacity. Consumers borrow hoping things will work out. Owners borrow knowing exactly how they will. This is why debt should feel dangerous. That feeling is a signal. It is telling you to pause, to examine, to ask better questions. Fear is not the enemy here. Ignorance is. The goal is not to eliminate fear. The goal is to understand what the fear is pointing to. If debt scares you, ask yourself, why? Is it because you do not know how you will pay it back? Is it because it tightens your monthly breathing room? Is it because it depends entirely on your continued effort? If the answer is yes, then the fear is accurate. Debt that relies on your constant effort is fragile. Debt that depends on stable circumstances is risky. Debt that collapses under pressure is a liability. The wealthy do not eliminate risk. They relocate it. They build systems where the risk is absorbed by assets, not emotions, by cash flow, not hope, by structure, not optimism. This is why they respect debt instead of fearing it. They do not romanticize it. They do not avoid it. They design around it. Understanding why debt feels dangerous is the first step toward mastering it. Because once you see the true source of the danger, you stop fighting the wrong battle. You stop trying to eliminate debt entirely. And you stop using it carelessly. You begin asking better questions, quieter questions, more powerful ones. And in the next chapter, you will confront the exact moment where debt stops being a tool and starts becoming a master. That moment is subtle, but once you see it, you can never unsee it. Debt does not enslave you the moment you sign the contract. That is the illusion. The real moment happens later, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. It happens when your choices begin to shrink. At first, everything feels manageable. The payments seem reasonable. Your income feels stable. Life continues as normal. But then something subtle changes. You stop asking, "What do I want to do?" And you start asking, "What can I afford to risk?" That is the moment debt begins to tighten its grip. Slavery is not always chains. Sometimes it is obligation without flexibility. Sometimes it is responsibility without margin. Debt becomes a master when it dictates your behavior, when it shapes your decisions before you are even aware of it, when it whispers constraints into every choice you make. You stay in a job you have outgrown because the payments demand certainty. You avoid opportunities that feel uncertain, even if they promise growth. You silence ideas not because they are bad, but because they feel risky. Debt does not shout. It nudges. And most people obey without realizing they are obeying anything at all. The moment debt turns you into a slave is not when you owe money. It is when the debt requires your obedience. When missing one paycheck would destabilize your life. You are not free. When an unexpected expense creates panic, you are not in control. When your financial structure cannot absorb shock, you are exposed. This is why so many people live carefully but not intentionally. They are not lazy. They are constrained. Their lives are shaped by invisible boundaries created by obligation. And this is where the illusion of normalcy becomes dangerous. Society has normalized debt so completely that most people no longer recognize captivity when they see it. Monthly payments are seen as a fact of life. Financial stress is treated as adulthood. Anxiety is worn as a badge of responsibility. But none of this is natural. A healthy financial structure expands your choices. A fragile one contracts them. Debt becomes slavery when it removes your ability to say no. No to overtime. No to stress. No to toxic environments. No to paths that no longer serve you. When debt depends entirely on your continued compliance, it owns leverage over you. This is why lenders do not need force. They rely on predictability. They know most people will protect their credit score at any cost. They know most people fear instability more than stagnation. They know obligation is more powerful than motivation. And so the system is built around regular payments, rigid timelines, and penalties for deviation, not because banks are evil, but because the structure rewards obedience. The dangerous illusion is believing that slavery only exists at extremes, that as long as you are not drowning, you are safe. But captivity begins long before collapse. It begins when your financial life becomes fragile, when one disruption could undo years of effort, when peace depends on everything going exactly as planned. Freedom is not about having no debt. Freedom is about having resilience. And most people borrow without building resilience first. They borrow against optimism. They borrow against projections. They borrow against future versions of themselves they have not yet become. And when reality interferes, pressure begins. Pressure changes people. It makes them short-term thinkers. It makes them defensive. It makes them conservative in the worst way. They stop playing offense in life. They start playing defense, not because they want to, but because they have to. This is the psychological cost of debt slavery. It is not just about money. It is about identity. You stop seeing yourself as a creator. You start seeing yourself as a payer. Your energy shifts from building to maintaining, from expanding to surviving. And survival mode is not where wealth is created. This is why the wealthy are not afraid of debt, but they are terrified of fragility. They understand that debt without insulation is danger. Debt without buffers is control. Debt without systems is exposure. They do not ask how much debt they have. They ask how dependent they are on perfect conditions. Because perfect conditions never last. Markets shift. Health changes. Industries evolve. Life interrupts. Debt that survives only in ideal circumstances is a trap. This is why borrowing before building stability is one of the most common mistakes people make. They assume the loan will motivate them. They believe pressure will sharpen them. They think urgency will force growth. Sometimes it does. But far more often, it forces compromise. Compromise of values. Compromise of time. Compromise of long-term thinking. Debt becomes a master, not because it exists, but because it is unsupported. Supported debt behaves differently. Debt backed by cash reserves feels calm. Debt supported by cash flow feels neutral. Debt structured with margin feels manageable. But debt that leans on your nervous system feels heavy. Debt that leans on your hope feels dangerous. Debt that leans on your next paycheck feels suffocating. This is the line you must learn to see. The line between debt as a tool and debt as a leash. Most people cross it unknowingly, not because they are reckless, but because they were never taught to look for it. They were taught to ask, "Can I get approved?" Not, "What happens if things change?" They were taught to chase opportunity, not to protect optionality. Optionality is freedom. The ability to adapt, the ability to pause, the ability to choose differently when conditions shift. Debt that destroys optionality destroys freedom. And once freedom is gone, growth becomes difficult. You can still make money. You can still succeed externally. But internally, you are constrained. The goal is not to avoid debt. The goal is to avoid dependency, to design your financial life so that no single obligation can control you, to ensure that your future is not held hostage by a monthly payment. In the next chapter, you will learn the single question that immediately reveals whether a loan will expand your freedom or quietly take it away. It is a simple question, but it is one most people never ask, and it changes everything. There is one question that changes everything. It is not complicated. It is not technical, and yet almost no one asks it. Before the wealthy sign any loan agreement, they pause and ask a single thing. Who pays this back? Not how fast, not how easy, not how impressive it looks. Who pays? Most people never ask this question. They ask a different one. Can I afford the monthly payment? That question sounds responsible, but it is shallow. It only measures comfort in the present moment. It does not measure control, because you can afford many things that still control you. You can afford a car payment that locks you into a job you hate. You can afford a mortgage that leaves you with no margin. You can afford debt that quietly drains your future flexibility. Affordability is not freedom. Structure is. When you ask, who pays this back? You are no longer thinking like a consumer. You are thinking like an owner. A consumer pays personally. An owner designs systems. If the answer to that question is, I do, with my time, my stress, and my paycheck, then the debt is already dangerous. It may look manageable. It may feel normal, but it is fragile. If your labor is the only thing standing between you and default, the loan owns leverage over you. This is the defining difference. Poor borrowers attach debt directly to their survival. Rich borrowers attach debt to assets. The poor borrow to acquire things. The wealthy borrow to acquire capacity. Capacity produces income. Things consume it. When the wealthy borrow, they ensure that the obligation is fed by something other than their nervous system. They ask, will this loan be paid by tenants? Will it be paid by customers? Will it be paid by systems, automation, or cash flow? If the answer is yes, the loan becomes neutral, sometimes even beneficial. If the answer is no, they walk away. No negotiation, no justification, no emotion. This is why two people with the same income make radically different decisions. One sees debt as a way to feel better now. The other sees debt as a tool to redirect energy. Consumers borrow to escape discomfort. Owners borrow to expand leverage. This is why most people feel anxious about debt, because they know, intuitively, that they are the ones paying for it. They know that one interruption could collapse everything. They feel the pressure because the pressure is real. The wealthy feel calm because the system absorbs the stress, not them. This question also reveals something deeper. Debt is not just financial. It is emotional. When you are the payer, you carry the weight. When the asset pays, you carry perspective. This is why wealthy borrowers do not rush. They do not chase approvals. They are patient. They would rather wait than accept a structure that binds them. They understand that a bad loan does not just cost money. It costs identity. When you repeatedly borrow in ways that rely on your personal effort, you reinforce an identity of dependency. You become someone who must keep working just to maintain equilibrium. This creates a life of maintenance, not momentum. The wealthy reject this identity early. They decide that if a loan does not create distance between their labor and the obligation, it is not worth taking. This is also why they are selective. They do not borrow for status. They do not borrow for comfort. They do not borrow to impress. They borrow to control cash flow. Cash flow is what pays debt quietly. Cash flow is what creates breathing room. Cash flow is what restores optionality. This is why real estate is so attractive to them. Not because of appreciation, but because tenants pay the loan. This is why businesses are attractive. Not because of ego, but because customers feed the obligation. The asset becomes the buffer. This is the core principle. If the loan survives only as long as you do, it is unsafe. If the loan survives because the asset works, it is stable. This is not about being risk-free. It is about being insulated. The wealthy do not eliminate risk. They ensure that risk is distributed. They ensure that failure in one area does not collapse the entire structure. This is why they can take calculated risks while others cannot. They are not braver. They are better structured. And this question applies beyond money. Every obligation you accept shapes your future. Every commitment claims energy. The wealthy are ruthless about where their energy goes. They understand that life is not lived in transactions, but in systems. If you want loans to work in your favor, you must stop asking if you can afford them, and start asking if they respect your future. Who pays this back? If the answer is not clear, the answer is no. Not later. Not after adjustments. Not with hope. No. This single question will save you years of pressure. It will prevent silent captivity. It will protect your peace. In the next chapter, you will go deeper into the structure that makes this possible. You will learn why good debt is not defined by interest rates, but by whether someone else carries the weight. Once you understand that, debt stops being emotional and starts becoming strategic. The simplest definition of good debt is also the most uncomfortable one. Good debt is not defined by low interest rates. It is not defined by long terms or friendly banks. It is defined by one thing only: someone else pays it. The moment you accept this truth, your entire understanding of money begins to shift. Most people believe debt becomes good when the numbers look reasonable. A manageable payment, a decent rate, a long enough timeline. But none of those things determine whether a loan will free you or trap you. What matters is who carries the weight. If your lifestyle must shrink to support the loan, the debt is bad. If your peace depends on everything going right, the debt is dangerous. If your income must remain stable just to survive the obligation, the debt owns leverage over you. Good debt behaves differently. It does not require sacrifice to survive. It requires structure. When the wealthy borrow, they are not thinking in terms of affordability. They are thinking in terms of replacement. What activity will replace my labor? They do not want debt that consumes cash. They want debt that redirects cash. This is why the phrase, "someone else pays," it matters so much. It forces clarity. A rental property is good debt, not because real estate is magical. It is good debt because tenants send rent every month. A business loan is good debt, not because entrepreneurship is glamorous. It is good debt because customers pay invoices. The asset produces cash flow. The cash flow services the debt, and the owner remains emotionally untouched. That distance is everything. Distance creates calm. Calm creates clarity. Clarity creates better decisions. This is why wealthy borrowers sleep well. They are not gambling their nervous system. They are not feeding debt with anxiety. They build structures where the obligation lives outside of them. Most people do the opposite. They attach debt directly to their identity. They say, "I owe," instead of "the asset owes." That language matters because the subconscious listens. When you identify as the payer, you internalize pressure. When the asset is the payer, you maintain perspective. This is why consumer debt feels heavy. It has no buffer, no insulation, no separation. You buy something. You owe money, and the obligation points straight at you. There is no system absorbing the stress. Good debt introduces distance between you and the obligation. It creates a layer. That layer is called cash flow. Cash flow is not just income. It is protection. It is what stands between you and panic. It is what allows mistakes without collapse. It is what restores optionality. This is why the wealthy obsess over cash flow, not balances. They understand that a loan with no cash flow is a liability regardless of how cheap it looks. And a loan with reliable cash flow can be powerful even at higher rates. Interest rates matter, but structure matters more. A perfectly priced loan that relies on your job is fragile. A moderately priced loan that relies on tenants is resilient. Resilience beats optimization every time. This is why the wealthy are patient. They wait for deals that support themselves. They refuse structures that require constant effort. They understand that wealth is built through systems that function without supervision. This is also why they are cautious. They know that not all income-producing assets are equal. Cash flow must be real, predictable, conservative. They do not assume perfect occupancy. They do not assume perfect customers. They design for reality. Because good debt stops being good the moment the asset cannot carry itself. This is where discipline comes in. You cannot call debt good simply because you want it to be. You cannot label a loan an investment without proof. Hope is not cash flow. Optimism is not income. Excitement does not pay interest. This is why wealthy borrowers analyze boring details. Maintenance, vacancy, downtime, market cycles. Not because they are pessimistic, but because they respect leverage. They understand that leverage magnifies everything, not just gains, mistakes too. Good debt is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not impress others. It does not elevate your status. It simply works. Month after month, year after year. Bad debt, on the other hand, demands attention. It creates emotional noise. It forces lifestyle adjustments. It constantly reminds you of its presence. Good debt fades into the background. Bad debt stays in your head. This is why good debt feels lighter even when the numbers are larger. Because you are not carrying it. The asset is. This distinction also reveals something deeper. Good debt respects your future self. Bad debt steals from it. Good debt expands your capacity over time. Bad debt compresses it. Good debt builds confidence quietly. Bad debt erodes it slowly. When you consistently structure debt where someone else pays, you begin to see money differently. You stop chasing income. You start building systems. You stop thinking monthly. You start thinking structurally. You stop fearing obligation. You start designing around it. This is the shift that separates wage earners from capital allocators. And it is not reserved for the elite. It is a way of thinking, a discipline, a refusal to borrow unless the structure is sound. The moment you accept that good debt must be paid by something other than you, your standards rise. You become selective. You become patient. You become strategic. You no longer feel tempted by convenience. You are guided by design. In the next chapter, you will go deeper into the force that makes this possible. Leverage, not as a fantasy, not as a shortcut, but as a multiplier that rewards structure and punishes carelessness. And once you understand how leverage really works, you will never look at borrowing the same way again. Leverage is one of the most misunderstood forces in money. Some people worship it. Others fear it. Both are wrong. Leverage is not magic. It does not create wealth on its own. It does not rescue bad decisions. Leverage simply amplifies whatever already exists. If the structure is strong, leverage accelerates progress. If the structure is weak, leverage accelerates collapse. This is why leverage feels powerful and dangerous at the same time. Most people are taught to think of leverage as risk, but that is incomplete. Leverage does not create risk. It reveals it. When you borrow, you magnify the consequences of your choices. Good decisions become better. Bad decisions become fatal. This is why leverage rewards clarity and punishes confusion. The wealthy understand this deeply. They do not use leverage to escape effort. They use it to concentrate results. They understand a simple truth. You do not need to own 100% of an asset to benefit from 100% of its performance. You only need to control it. Control is the real prize. When you control an income-producing asset, you control cash flow. When you control cash flow, you control obligation. And when you control obligation, you control your future. This is why leverage is central to wealth building. Without leverage, growth is linear. You trade hours for income. You save slowly. You progress cautiously. With leverage, growth becomes exponential. Systems work while you rest. Assets compound while you sleep. But only if the foundation is sound. Most people encounter leverage accidentally. A mortgage, a car loan, a credit line. They are told it is normal. They are not taught how it works. So they assume leverage is something that happens to them, not something they can design. This is the trap. The wealthy approach leverage deliberately. They ask questions before they borrow. Does this asset produce income? Is that income predictable? Is it resilient under pressure? Does it comfortably exceed the cost of the debt? If the answer is no, leverage is rejected. Not debated. Not justified. Rejected. Because leverage does not forgive optimism. Optimism is not a buffer. Hope is not a margin of safety. Leverage requires space. Space between income and expense. Space between obligation and survival. Space between pressure and panic. This is why the wealthy never push leverage to the limit. They leave room. They understand that the purpose of leverage is not speed. It is sustainability. A highly leveraged structure with no margin is fragile. A moderately leveraged structure with strong buffers is resilient. Resilience compounds. Fragility collapses. This is where most people misunderstand leverage. They think leverage is about borrowing as much as possible. It is not. It is about borrowing only as much as the system can carry without you. The moment leverage requires your constant attention, it has failed. This is why good leverage feels boring. It does not demand excitement. It does not require constant monitoring. It does not create adrenaline. It simply works. The bank is paid. The asset operates. The owner observes. Bad leverage feels exciting at first. Fast approvals, big numbers, ambitious projections. But excitement is often a warning sign. When leverage feels thrilling, it is usually because risk is being ignored. The wealthy do not chase thrill. They chase repeatability. They want structures that can survive boredom, not just brilliance. This is also why they respect time. Leverage unfolds over years, not weeks. It compounds quietly. It rewards patience. The impatient misuse leverage. They stack obligations. They compress margins. They assume best-case scenarios. And when reality intervenes, leverage magnifies the damage. The wealthy assume friction, vacancies, delays, repairs, slow periods. They design leverage to survive these moments. Because leverage does not eliminate reality, it intensifies it. Another misunderstanding is believing leverage replaces discipline. It does not. Leverage demands discipline. You must manage cash flow. You must maintain reserves. You must monitor performance. Leverage without discipline is gambling. This is why the wealthy combine leverage with systems, budgets, controls, rules, not because they are fearful, but because they are precise. Precision is power. When leverage is used correctly, something important happens. Your personal effort becomes less relevant. You are no longer the engine. You are the architect. This is the true freedom leverage offers. Not escape from work, but escape from dependency. Your income no longer collapses if you pause. Your progress does not stop if you rest. The system continues. This is the difference between workers and owners. Workers must be present. Owners must be correct. Leverage rewards correctness. This is why the wealthy are obsessed with structure. They know that once leverage is in place, small errors scale quickly. So they eliminate error early. They plan conservatively. They borrow deliberately. They expand gradually. This patience looks boring from the outside, but it is devastatingly effective over time. Leverage also teaches humility, because it reminds you that control is temporary. Markets change. Costs rise. Conditions shift. The wealthy never forget this. They treat leverage as a tool, not an identity. They are willing to reduce it, They are willing to walk away. They do not confuse growth with ego. This humility protects them, because leverage does not care about pride. It only responds to numbers. When used correctly, leverage becomes invisible. You stop noticing it. You stop fearing it. It becomes part of the background structure supporting your life. That is the goal. Not dramatic wins, not fast growth, but quiet inevitability. In the next chapter, you will confront the discipline that makes leverage sustainable. Because leverage without discipline is temporary, and discipline without leverage is slow. But when the two work together, progress becomes unstoppable. There is a rule about debt that is rarely explained clearly, not because it is complicated, but because understanding it shifts power away from institutions and back to the individual. This rule does not appear in loan brochures. It is not emphasized by bankers, and it is almost never discussed in schools. Yet it quietly determines who becomes wealthy through borrowing and who becomes trapped by it. The rule is simple. Debt only works in your favor when three forces move together: the spread, inflation, and time. Miss one of them, and the loan begins working against you. Most people focus only on interest rates. They believe that lower rates equal safety, and higher rates equal danger. This is an incomplete picture. Interest rates matter, but they are not the deciding factor. The real question is not how expensive the money is. It is whether the money produces more value than it costs. This difference is called the spread. The spread is the gap between what your debt costs you and what your asset earns for you. When the spread is positive, debt becomes leverage. When it is negative, debt becomes extraction. This is where most people fail. They borrow without calculating the spread. They borrow based on emotion, optimism, or convenience. They assume effort will compensate for bad structure. It never does. A loan with a negative spread quietly drains energy, focus, and time. Every month, it demands payment without producing anything in return. This is why consumer debt feels heavy. It does not generate cash flow. It consumes it. In contrast, a loan with a positive spread feels different. It breathes. The asset attached to it contributes. It shares the burden. This is why investors can hold large amounts of debt without anxiety. Their assets participate in repayment, but the spread alone is not enough. The second force is inflation. Inflation is often framed as an enemy. Rising prices, decreasing purchasing power. But to the disciplined borrower, inflation is a silent ally. When you lock in long-term, fixed-rate debt, you freeze your cost of money in today's dollars. Over time, those dollars lose value. Your payment stays the same, but your income and asset values adjust upward. This means you are repaying your loan with cheaper money each year. Inflation quietly reduces the real weight of fixed debt. This is why long-term fixed loans are powerful when attached to income-producing assets. The asset rises with inflation. The debt does not. The gap widens in your favor. Savers lose purchasing power. Owners with fixed debt gain leverage. This is not theory. It is arithmetic. Yet most people never experience this benefit. Why? Because they borrow without structure. They borrow short-term. They borrow variable rate. They borrow for consumption. In these scenarios, inflation works against them. Costs rise. Payments increase. Income stays flat. Debt becomes suffocating. The same force that enriches one borrower crushes another. The difference is positioning. The third force is time. Time is the most underestimated variable in finance. A loan is not just money. It is a timeline. Every month you hold debt. Interest accrues. But so does asset performance. Time magnifies structure. If the structure is sound, time compounds wealth. If the structure is flawed, time compounds stress. Banks understand this deeply. That is why they design products that extend time. Lower payments, longer terms, refinancing offers. Each one feels helpful. Each one increases total interest paid. This is the refinancing illusion. People feel relief because payments drop. They feel smarter because rates fall. But they ignore the timeline. They reset the clock. They trade short-term comfort for long-term cost. The bank wins quietly. The borrower feels lighter now, and heavier later. This is why lower payments are psychologically seductive. They reduce pressure. They increase flexibility. But they also reduce urgency. And urgency is what drives freedom. When payments are low, discipline weakens. When discipline weakens, timelines stretch. This is how debt becomes permanent. The quiet rule is this: you do not win with debt by minimizing payments. You win by minimizing duration. Duration determines dominance. Shorter timelines reduce interest exposure. They restore optionality. They return control. Banks profit from time. Borrowers gain freedom by ending it. This is why the most powerful borrowers think differently. They do not ask, "How can I make this easier?" They ask, "How can I finish this sooner?" They understand that leverage is temporary by design. It is a tool, not a lifestyle. They also understand that fixed debt paired with variable income is dangerous unless buffered by liquidity. Which is why disciplined borrowers never rely on perfect conditions. They plan for disruption. They assume volatility. They build margin. This margin is not optimism. It is structure. Banks lend aggressively because they can externalize risk. Borrowers must internalize it. This is the final part of the rule. Debt is safe only when you retain optionality. Optionality comes from cash, flexibility, and time buffers. Without them, even good debt can become lethal. This is why some people collapse during minor downturns, while others expand. They are not smarter. They are better structured. The quiet rule the banks hope you never learn is not about interest rates at all. It is about alignment, positive spread, fixed debt, time reduction. When these three move together, debt becomes a servant. When they do not, debt becomes a master. In the next chapter, you will see why cash reserves are not just safety nets, but strategic weapons. Because leverage without liquidity is gambling. And gambling always ends the same way. Most people believe debt is a math problem. They think if the interest rate is low enough, the loan is safe. If the payment fits their budget. The loan is manageable. If the numbers look reasonable, everything will be fine. This belief ruins more lives than high interest ever could. Because debt is not defeated by numbers. It is defeated by behavior. Interest rates influence outcomes. Discipline determines survival. You can survive a bad rate with discipline. You cannot survive a good rate without it. Discipline is what keeps debt from slowly changing who you are. At the beginning of a loan, people are careful. They budget. They plan. They promise themselves, this is temporary. Then comfort arrives. Payments feel normal. Income feels stable. Nothing bad happens. This is when discipline begins to erode. Not all at once, but quietly. You allow small upgrades. You justify small indulgences. You tell yourself you deserve relief. This is how debt becomes permanent. Not through crisis, through comfort. The dangerous phase of borrowing is not when money is tight. It is when money feels sufficient. Discipline exists to protect you from yourself during this phase. It forces you to treat debt seriously even when it feels harmless. It keeps urgency alive when pressure fades. This is why discipline matters more than the rate. A low rate can lull you into complacency. A high rate keeps you alert. Alert borrowers survive. Complacent ones drift. Discipline shows up first in budgeting. Not budgeting as restriction, but budgeting as command. A budget is not a list of expenses. It is a declaration of priorities. When you carry debt, your budget is no longer optional. It is a control system. Without it, money leaks. Leaks become habits. Habits become identity. The disciplined borrower does not ask, "What can I afford this month?" They ask, "What must be paid first?" Debt repayment becomes non-negotiable. It is treated like gravity. You do not debate it. You build around it. This removes decision fatigue. When repayment is automatic, temptation weakens. When temptation weakens, consistency forms. Consistency is more powerful than motivation. Motivation fades. Discipline repeats. Discipline also governs repayment behavior. Most borrowers aim for minimum payments. They see debt as something to coexist with. Disciplined borrowers aim for elimination. They do not ask how to make payments easier. They ask how to shorten the timeline. Every extra payment is not just money saved. It is time reclaimed. Time without obligation. Time without pressure. Time where income belongs to you again. This perspective changes everything. You stop seeing extra income as permission to spend. You see it as leverage to escape. Raises, bonuses, unexpected cash are not rewards. They are weapons. Disciplined borrowers deploy them immediately. They attack the principal. They delete future interest. This behavior looks boring from the outside, but boredom is freedom in disguise. Discipline also protects your psychology. Debt creates mental noise. Statements, balances, due dates. Without discipline, this noise becomes stress. Stress becomes anxiety. Anxiety clouds judgment. Disciplined borrowers eliminate uncertainty. They know exactly where they stand. They track progress. They see momentum. Momentum replaces fear. Fear fades when you see the end. This clarity allows disciplined borrowers to sleep peacefully, even with debt, because they are not guessing. They are executing. Interest rates cannot provide this peace. Only discipline can. Discipline also shields you from lifestyle creep. Lifestyle creep is the silent killer of wealth. Income rises. Spending follows. Debt stays. You feel richer but remain trapped. Discipline freezes lifestyle. Not permanently. Strategically. You choose delay over display. You choose structure over status. This is not deprivation. It is sequencing. You delay consumption so that future consumption is effortless. Discipline understands timing. Now is not forever, but forever is shaped by now. This is why disciplined borrowers rarely regret restraint, but undisciplined borrowers always regret indulgence. Discipline also prepares you for volatility. Markets shift. Income fluctuates. Life interrupts. The disciplined borrower expects disruption. They plan for it. They keep margins. They avoid fragile structures. They do not live at maximum capacity. This margin is invisible strength. It turns crises into inconveniences. Interest rates cannot create margin. Discipline does. This is why banks respect disciplined borrowers more than clever ones. Clever borrowers optimize. Disciplined borrowers endure. Endurance builds credibility. Credibility unlocks future leverage. Better terms. Better access. Better control. This is the long game. Discipline compounds. The habits you build while carrying debt do not disappear when the debt is gone. You continue budgeting. You continue directing surplus. You continue thinking in timelines instead of moments. This is how debt becomes training, not trauma. Those who lack discipline are scarred by debt. Those who cultivate it are shaped by it. They emerge calmer, more deliberate, more dangerous financially. This is the quiet truth. Interest rates affect the math. Discipline governs the outcome. And without discipline, every loan eventually takes control. In the next chapter, you will see why discipline alone is not enough. Why even the most disciplined borrower needs one more layer of protection. Because cash is not just safety. It is power. Most people believe an emergency fund exists to protect them from disaster. They think of it as insurance, a cushion, a backup plan. That belief is incomplete. An emergency fund is not about fear. It is about leverage. It is not designed to save you when things go wrong. It is designed to give you power when things go right. Because debt does not break people during disasters. It breaks them when options disappear. When you borrow without cash reserves, you are not just taking on debt. You are surrendering choice. Every loan you take creates obligation. Every obligation reduces flexibility. Without cash, that reduction becomes total. This is why banks demand liquidity. They understand what most borrowers do not. Cash is not idle money. Cash is control. An emergency fund is the difference between reacting and deciding. When life disrupts your income, the lender does not pause. They do not renegotiate compassionately. They enforce contracts. Debt is rigid. Life is not. This mismatch is where people collapse. Without cash, a single interruption becomes a cascade. Missed payments, late fees, stress decisions. Stress decisions destroy structure. With cash, disruption becomes noise. You continue paying. You continue breathing. You continue thinking. Thinking is power. This is why disciplined borrowers never borrow naked. They armor themselves first, not because they expect failure, but because they expect reality. Reality includes volatility. Jobs change. Markets shift. Health fluctuates. A borrower without reserves must rely on hope. Hope is not a strategy. A borrower with reserves relies on time. Time to adjust. Time to recover. Time to respond intelligently. Time neutralizes panic. This is why emergency funds are not passive. They are active leverage. They allow you to say no. No to refinancing traps. No to predatory credit. No to selling assets at the worst moment. Without cash, desperation negotiates for you. And desperation never negotiates well. This is the quiet trap. People borrow first and promise to build reserves later. Later never comes. Because debt absorbs surplus. Payments consume margin. Life fills the gaps. This sequence guarantees fragility. The correct sequence is uncomfortable. Cash first. Debt second. This requires patience. Patience most people avoid. But patience is cheaper than regret. An emergency fund changes how you experience debt psychologically. You stop feeling hunted by due dates. You stop fearing mail notifications. You stop reacting emotionally. You gain calm. Calm restores clarity. Clarity improves decision-making. This is why cash-rich borrowers behave differently. They negotiate better terms. They walk away more easily. They refuse bad deals without anxiety, because they are not cornered. A borrower without cash accepts terms. A borrower with cash chooses them. Choice is power. This is why banks prefer borrowers with reserves, not because they need the money, but because reserves signal behavior. They signal discipline, restraint, foresight. These traits reduce risk. Risk determines pricing. Cash lowers perceived risk. Lower risk improves leverage. This is how liquidity quietly amplifies borrowing power. But the most important role of an emergency fund is not external. It is internal. It protects your identity. Debt has a way of creeping into how people see themselves. They begin thinking monthly instead of strategically. They optimize survival instead of growth. Cash interrupts this shift. It reminds you that you are not fragile, that you are not dependent, that you are not desperate. This psychological stability matters more than the number itself. Because desperation creates bad debt. Bad debt compounds. Cash stops that cycle before it starts. It keeps you from borrowing to cover borrowing. This is the spiral most people never escape. They borrow to survive payments, then borrow again to survive life. Eventually, debt is no longer a tool. It is the environment. Cash prevents this environment from forming. This is why an emergency fund should never be invested aggressively. It should not chase returns. Its job is not to grow. Its job is to exist. Reliably. Immediately. Without friction. Liquidity beats yield in this role. Because access matters more than growth. You do not need your emergency fund to perform. You need it to respond. And response speed is everything. The size of the fund is not about fear. It is about runway. Runway gives you options. Options restore dignity. Dignity prevents compromise. This is why borrowers with reserves rarely panic. They absorb shocks quietly. They adapt smoothly. They continue executing their plan, while others scramble. They remain still. Stillness is strategic. This is also why emergency funds protect your assets. Without cash, people sell at the worst times. They liquidate under pressure. They destroy years of progress to solve short-term stress. Cash absorbs stress, so assets can continue working. This separation is critical. Debt requires servicing. Assets require time. Cash bridges the gap. This is power. Not flashy power. Quiet power. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that allows you to sleep. The kind that keeps loans working for you instead of against you. In the next chapter, you will learn how even disciplined, liquid borrowers fall into one of the most common traps in finance. A trap disguised as relief. A trap disguised as intelligence. The refinancing illusion. Because not all improvements are progress. There is a moment when debt feels heavy. Payments feel repetitive. Obligation feels endless. And right at that moment, an offer appears. Lower monthly payments. A better rate. More breathing room. It feels like relief. This is where many disciplined borrowers quietly lose control. Not because refinancing is always wrong, but because most people refinance for the wrong reason. They refinance to feel better, not to become freer. This distinction matters. The refinancing illusion works by targeting emotion, not logic. It tells you the pressure will ease. It tells you the burden will shrink. It tells you that you are being smart. But it hides the real cost. Time. Refinancing rarely reduces the total obligation. It redistributes it. You feel lighter now because the monthly pain decreases. But the timeline stretches, and time is where interest lives. Banks understand this perfectly. They do not profit from your comfort. They profit from your duration. A longer loan, even at a slightly lower rate, often generates more interest overall, especially when amortization resets. This is the detail most borrowers ignore. In the early years of a loan, most of your payment goes to interest, not principal. When you refinance, you often return to that early stage. You erase progress. You restart the clock. It feels like forward motion. It is not. It is circular movement. The illusion deepens because the numbers look better. Lower rate. Lower payment. But the loan lives longer. This is how banks quietly reclaim leverage. You regain comfort. They regain time. And time always favors the lender. Refinancing also weakens discipline. Pain enforces focus. Comfort dissolves it. When payments drop, urgency fades. When urgency fades, Lifestyle expands. You spend the difference. You justify upgrades. Debt adapts to your comfort level. This is how temporary relief becomes permanent obligation. Refinancing teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches that pressure can be negotiated away instead of eliminated. This mindset is dangerous because it trains you to escape discomfort instead of resolving it. Wealth is not built by avoiding discomfort. It is built by finishing it. The disciplined borrower does not ask, "How can I lower this payment?" They ask, "How can I end this obligation?" Refinancing also carries invisible costs: fees, closing costs, legal charges, often rolled into the loan, which means you now pay interest on the cost of refinancing itself. You borrow money to borrow money. This compounding waste is subtle, but real. Even when refinancing technically saves money on paper, it often fails behaviorally. Most people do not maintain the original payment level. They spend the difference. What could have shortened the loan instead extends it. The strategy fails not because the math is wrong, but because behavior is predictable. Banks rely on this predictability. They know borrowers seek relief, not mastery. This is why refinancing is marketed aggressively. It feels helpful. It feels supportive. But it rarely serves the borrower's long-term interest. The only time refinancing truly works is when structure improves, not comfort. When the rate drops significantly, when the term does not extend, when payments remain unchanged or increase, this shortens duration. Shorter duration restores power, but this requires discipline few possess. Most people refinance to escape pressure, not to compress timelines. And so the illusion persists. Debt feels easier. Freedom feels farther. The tragedy is not that refinancing exists. It is that it is misunderstood. People believe lower payments equal progress. They do not. Progress is measured in principle destroyed, not discomfort avoided. This is why disciplined borrowers tolerate pressure. They understand its purpose. Pressure reminds you that the obligation is unfinished. It prevents complacency. It keeps debt temporary. Refinancing removes pressure prematurely. And when pressure disappears, debt settles in. This is how people carry loans for decades longer than necessary. Not because they could not pay faster, but because they chose comfort instead of completion. The refinancing illusion is seductive because it feels responsible. But responsibility is not about feeling better today. It is about being freer tomorrow. The borrower who understands this does not fear pressure. They use it. They see each payment as progress, each extra dollar as acceleration. They do not look for exits that delay freedom. They look for paths that shorten it. This is the final test of maturity in borrowing. Can you tolerate discomfort long enough to end obligation? Or will you trade freedom for relief? The answer to that question determines whether loans remain tools or become environments. In the final chapter, you will bring everything together, not as rules, not as techniques, but as identity. Because how you borrow is not just about money. It is about who you are when pressure arrives. And whether you think like an owner or like a consumer. At the end of every financial decision, there is always one silent question, not written on paper, not asked by the bank, but answered by your behavior. Are you borrowing like an owner or like a consumer? This is the final distinction. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. A consumer borrows to feel better now. An owner borrows to be stronger later. A consumer asks what they can get. An owner asks what they can control. A consumer measures success by comfort. An owner measures success by position. This difference is not about income. It is not about intelligence. It is about identity. Consumers experience debt emotionally. Owners experience it structurally. Consumers feel pressure and seek relief. Owners feel pressure and seek resolution. This is why the same loan destroys one person and builds another. Consumers borrow to extend lifestyle. Owners borrow to extend leverage. Consumers sign contracts hoping things work out. Owners sign contracts knowing exactly how they end. Hope is emotional. Structure is deliberate. Owners do not ask if a loan is scary. They ask if it is aligned. Aligned with cash flow. Aligned with time horizon. Aligned with identity. They understand that money does not respond to desire. It responds to structure. And structure follows identity. When you borrow like an owner, your behavior changes automatically. You stop asking, "Can I afford this payment?" and start asking, "What pays this back?" You stop optimizing for monthly comfort and start optimizing for total control. You stop chasing lower payments and start compressing timelines. You stop seeing debt as something to carry and start seeing it as something to finish. This shift is subtle, but it is permanent. Owners do not build their lives around loans. They build loans around their lives. They design debt to be temporary, specific, and purposeful. Every dollar borrowed has a mission. Every obligation has an exit. Nothing is vague. Consumers accept vagueness. Owners reject it. This is why owners sleep well with debt, not because they owe less, but because they understand more. They know where the loan fits. They know what supports it. They know what ends it. They are not guessing. This clarity eliminates fear. Fear comes from uncertainty. Certainty comes from structure. Owners also understand that discipline is not a phase. It is a permanent trait. They do not relax discipline when things improve. They intensify it. They know success attracts temptation, and temptation destroys leverage. This is why owners remain boring longer than others, but finish earlier. They delay celebration until obligation ends, not because they deny themselves joy, but because they understand sequence. First, control, then freedom, then enjoyment without consequence. This order is non-negotiable. Borrowing like an owner also changes how you see money itself. Money stops being something you chase. It becomes something that responds to consistency, responds to structure, responds to alignment. This is why wealth often arrives quietly, not as a windfall, but as stability. Payments disappear. Pressure fades. Options expand. Suddenly, money listens. But this does not happen accidentally. It happens because you trained yourself. Debt becomes the teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches restraint. It teaches clarity. Those who resist the lesson are punished by it. Those who accept the lesson are shaped by it. This is the final truth. Loans do not ruin people. People ruin loans. When you borrow without identity, debt defines you. When you borrow with identity, you define debt. Borrowing like an owner means you never forget one thing. The goal is not to have access to money. The goal is to have authority over it. Authority comes from alignment. When your income, your behavior, your timeline, and your identity move together, money becomes cooperative. It stops resisting. It stops slipping away. It stops creating tension. It flows toward structure. This is why some people never escape debt, even when they earn more, and others accelerate, even when they start small. They are not borrowing differently. They are being differently. So as this audiobook ends, do not memorize rules. Do not chase tactics. Adopt an identity. From this point forward, you do not borrow to consume. You borrow to control. You do not borrow to escape discomfort. You borrow to build position. You do not borrow like the many. You borrow like the few. Because once you borrow like an owner, loans stop working against you. They start working for you. And eventually, they stop being necessary at all. That is financial sovereignty. And now, you know how to build it. At this point, nothing you heard was meant to excite you. It was meant to steady you. Because real financial power does not arrive with noise. It arrives with clarity. You have not just learned how loans work. You have learned how you work when pressure is present. You now understand why debt breaks some people and sharpens others. You understand that borrowing is never just a financial act. It is a behavioral decision, an identity decision. From this moment forward, you no longer need to fear loans, and you no longer need to glorify them. You simply see them for what they are. Temporary tools, designed to serve structure, never emotion. If you listened carefully, you may notice something subtle inside you right now. A calm, a grounded awareness. That is the sound of confusion leaving. Wealth is not built by rushing. It is built by alignment. Alignment between patience and pressure. Between discipline and opportunity. Between who you are and how you move money. And once alignment is present, inevitability follows. If this audiobook helped you think more clearly, feel more stable, or see money with less fear and more authority, take one small action, like this video. Subscribe to the channel, not for algorithms, but as a commitment to yourself. This channel exists for people who grow quietly, who think long-term, who choose structure over shortcuts. If you want to continue this journey, the next audiobook waiting for you will deepen this foundation. Because controlling money is not the end. It is the beginning. And as always, listen slowly, let it settle, and return when you are ready for the next level. Good night.